My name is Daniela Ibarra. I am 32 years old, and I used to believe that the house I grew up in held all the same story for everyone who lived in it. I was wrong. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio, a small town in Athens County with one main road, a grain elevator visible from most of the residential streets, and the kind of community geography where everyone knew the shape of everyone else's life without necessarily knowing its contents. My father, Gustavo Ibarra, had worked in regional commercial lending for most of my childhood. He was a careful man. Not cold careful. There is a difference, though it took me a long time to see it. He remembered dates and details with the reliability of someone who had trained himself to track things. He paid attention in a quiet way that you only noticed if you were also paying attention. By the time this story begins, he had been transferred to a senior credit officer role at a regional bank in Columbus with a portfolio covering 12 counties. I had a degree in urban planning from Ohio State and worked for a municipal consulting firm in Columbus. My apartment was 12 minutes from my father's new office building, which was part of why I had offered to help him move in. My sister, Paula, was 4 years older and lived in Cincinnati. My mother, Renata, had stayed in Millfield, semi-retired and firm about it. Before I tell you what I found in that office, I want to ask you something. Think about whether there's a person from your earliest years, someone who was simply there, part of the texture of your childhood, who disappeared without explanation. Someone whose absence you accepted because children accept the shape of the world they're given, and it's only later, from a different altitude, that you understand something was missing. Because what I'm about to tell you started with a face I last saw when I was 7 years old. The anchor object in this story is a framed photograph. Color, slightly older, the quality of something printed in the mid-90s from a film camera. A backyard, 8 or 9 children in the loose arrangement of a summer afternoon. I did not know this photograph existed at the beginning of this story. By the end, I will have understood why my father had carried it through every office he occupied for 30 years. Remember the photograph. The office move happened on a Saturday in October. My father had not asked for help, he rarely asked directly, but he had mentioned at dinner the previous Sunday that he was moving into the new space the following weekend and that there were boxes. I told him I would come. He said I didn't need to. I said I would be there at 9. I brought coffee and a box cutter and the understanding that helping my father move meant following a system I had not designed and would not be invited to modify. He was precise about where things went and why they went there. The desk went against the east wall. The binders went on the left shelf. The correspondence drawer went into the upper right. He handed me a box that was sealed with tape and labeled, in his handwriting, "Personal Items, Desk." He said, "You can open that one." I set it on the desk and cut the tape and opened it. Inside were the things that lived on his desk regardless of what office he was in, a small succulent in a terracotta pot that my mother had given him years ago and that somehow survived every transition, a pen holder I had made in a 7th grade ceramics class, lopsided and glazed the wrong shade of green, a paperweight from a conference he had attended in 2009, and the framed photograph. I picked up the photograph. It was a color photo, slightly older, the quality of something printed in the mid-90s from a film camera. It showed a group of children in a backyard, perhaps 8 or 9 of them, in the loose arrangement of a summer afternoon where someone has said look this way and half of them have complied. The children were various ages, 7 to 12 or so. One of them, in the center left, was smiling directly at the camera with the particular confidence of a child who is comfortable being looked at. I knew her face. My pulse went still in a way that is different from stopping, more like a held breath, a suspension before the next thing. I had grown up 3 houses down from the Calloway family. They had moved onto our street in Millfield when I was 5, and for 2 years they had been the neighbors whose house you went to. Mrs. Calloway kept a bowl of wrapped candies on the porch railing in summer, and their yard backed up to a small stand of trees where the neighborhood children built things out of fallen branches with the specific ambition of 7-year-olds who have no architectural training and unlimited optimism. The girl in the photograph was Maya Calloway. I was certain. The confidence of the smile, the particular angle of her chin when she was being looked at. I had spent 2 years as her neighbor and I knew that face the way you know a face that was simply part of your world before you had the vocabulary to describe what familiar meant. The Calloways had left the winter I was 7. Not gradually, suddenly. 1 week they were there and the next the house was empty, and the week after that there was a for sale sign, and by spring the sign was gone and a different family had moved in. My mother had said when I asked that the Calloways had moved away because of Mr. Calloway's work. I had accepted this. I was 7. Work took families away. I had a general understanding of this principle from other departures I had witnessed on other streets. I asked once more a few weeks later and my mother said the same thing, and I did not ask again. I had not thought about Maya Calloway in a very long time. The face in the photograph had reached back through 25 years and placed itself in front of me without warning. I was still holding the frame when my father came back into the office from the hallway where he had been checking the placement of the shelving unit. I held it up. "Dad," I said, "this girl? The one in the middle. I know her." He looked at the photograph. His face did not do the thing I expected, which was the small pleased surprise of a parent whose child has noticed something interesting. His face did something else, a tightening, controlled, the adjustment of someone managing their response rather than simply having it. "Where do you think you know her from?" He said. "The Calloways," I said. "Maya Calloway. She lived on our street. 3 houses down, the greenhouse. She left when I was 7. My father looked at the photograph for another moment. Then he looked at me. "You were very young," he said. "Memory at that age isn't always reliable." I looked at the photograph. I looked at the face in it. I had been 7, yes. But I had also been 7 and certain in the way that children are certain about the faces of people who have been part of their daily landscape, before the world gets large enough to blur them. "I'm sure it's her," I said. My father took the photograph from my hand. Not roughly, just took it, the transfer of an object he had decided to manage himself. He set it on the desk with the frame facing him. "Let's get the rest of the boxes," he said. I stood in front of the desk for a moment. He was already moving back toward the hallway. The photograph was facing away from me now. Maya Calloway's smile pointed at the wall behind the desk. I picked up the empty box and followed him out. For the next hour I carried boxes and unpacked books and placed items where he indicated and said nothing about the photograph. He was cordial and organized, and the work proceeded with the efficiency of 2 people who know how to work alongside each other. But there was a layer underneath the efficiency that had not been there before I opened the box, and we both knew it, and we were both pretending we did not. At noon he said he was going to walk down to the deli on the ground floor and get lunch. He asked if I wanted anything. I said I would come with him. He said he'd just grab something quickly and be back. It was easier that way, and he was already putting on his jacket. I sat down in the desk chair after he left. I turned the photograph to face me. I looked at Maya Calloway's face for a long time. Then I took out my phone and photographed it. My father came back with sandwiches and we ate at the desk and talked about my mother's garden and Paola's youngest child, who had recently begun walking, and the conversation had the surface ease of 2 people who are talking about real things and avoiding a realer one. When I left that afternoon I drove 12 minutes home with the image on my phone and the specific texture of his face when I had held up the frame, the controlled tightening, the managed response, and I sat in my car in the parking garage for a few minutes before I went upstairs. My father had always been like this about certain things. Not evasive in general, he was one of the most precise people I had known, the opposite of vague about most subjects. But there were categories where precision stopped. Where the answer was complete enough to end the conversation without being complete enough to actually answer it. When I was 12, I found a box of letters in the basement while I was looking for holiday decorations. They were bundled with a rubber band, handwritten on plain paper, with no return address on the envelopes. I brought them upstairs and asked my mother whose they were. She looked at them and then at me and took them from my hands and said they were old correspondence from before I was born and she would put them back where they belonged. I asked whose handwriting it was. She said it was from a long time ago and there was nothing to explain and went back to the kitchen. My father was not home that afternoon. I do not know if my mother told him what I had found. The box was not where I had found it when I went back to the basement 2 weeks later. I had looked. When I was 16, I came across a name in a document my father had left open on the family computer, an email he had been composing and had minimized. The name was in the address line. It was not a name I recognized at the time, E. Calloway. I was 16 and I knew the name Calloway from the family that had lived 3 houses down, though by then the memory was 9 years old and soft at the edges. I noted the name with the partial attention of a teenager doing something else and moved on. I thought about it again that October afternoon in the parking garage and understood that I had filed it somewhere and not retrieved it in 16 years. My father was not a man who invented things. He was a man who managed what he told you and when he told you and how much. This was different from lying, in the way that a door that is not locked but also never opened is different from a locked door. The mechanism is different. The result is the same. Over my adult years, I had assembled a small inventory of the places where this quality showed itself. The time I had asked him at 22 who he had dated before my mother, and he had said a few people, nothing that amounted to much in a tone that was pleasant and final. The time Paula had asked at her wedding rehearsal dinner whether there was anyone from his side of the family who should have been invited but wasn't, some estranged relative, someone he had lost touch with, and he had said no one in the same pleasant and final register. The time I had been doing a genealogy project for a family history class in college and had asked my father to fill out a brief family history questionnaire, and he had returned it complete in every category except the one that asked about significant relationships or friendships before marriage, which he had left blank without commenting on the omission. I had noted each of these at the time and set them down the way you set down a thing you cannot use yet. Not as evidence. Evidence implies a conclusion you are building toward. I was not building toward anything. I was simply keeping an accurate account of a pattern I could see but had not yet named. The inventory I want to account for here is not dramatic. It is the small accumulative work of someone who has spent years paying careful attention to things no one was watching her pay attention to. I had managed my father's relocation logistics that October, coordinating with the building services contact on his behalf, scheduling the elevator reservation for the move day, arranging the parking permits for the contractor vehicles. He had not asked me to do any of it. He had mentioned at that Sunday dinner that there were boxes, and I had arrived the following week to find the logistics already handled. That was the week I had spent 2 evenings on the phone with building management and permit offices, because someone was going to have to, and it was going to be the person who noticed things needed doing. I had spent the week after the office visit doing what I did every day at work, pulling ownership records and transfer histories, cross-referencing names against public registries, building a timeline from fragments. 7 searches across 2 evenings. A folder of printed records organized by date. An ownership transfer document showing Edward and Diane Calloway, February 1999, the same February I had watched the greenhouse go dark. The name E. Calloway finally located in a LinkedIn profile, a nonprofit development director, 51 years old, in Columbus. I had spent 3 years without naming it as such, being the person my father called when he needed something thought through, not by asking for my opinion, but by mentioning things in my hearing, the way careful people test load-bearing walls by leaning against them gently before they trust their weight to them. I had been that wall. I had been reliable enough that even a man who managed every disclosure had chosen, when the moment finally came, to show the photograph to me. I was not frightened exactly, but I had been carrying a careful attention to these gaps for 25 years, and what I felt now was the particular weight of a question that had finally gotten large enough to ask. What I had never done across all the years of that pattern was confront it directly. Partly because I was careful by nature, the way my father was careful, I understood the architecture of a managed conversation, and I did not usually try to take a wall down from the outside when there was no door. And partly because there was something I had known without putting words to it, that the thing my father was managing had a size to it. That when the door finally opened it would not be to an empty room. The Calloway name in that email. The letters in the basement. The photograph turned to face the wall. I had not been wrong about the size. In the week after the office visit I did something I had never done before, which was a direct search, not an idle one, not the kind you do when curiosity is mostly casual, but a deliberate one. I searched for Maya Calloway in Ohio Public Records. I searched for E. Calloway. I searched for the address of the greenhouse in Millfield and the name of whoever had owned it before the family who bought it after the Calloways left. The ownership record for the greenhouse listed the sellers in 1999 as E. and D. Calloway. Edward and Diane. The transfer date was February of the winter I was 7, the winter they left. I printed what I had found. I put it in a folder. I did not call my father. He called me. It was a Thursday evening, 10 days after the office visit. I was at my kitchen table going through project documents when my phone showed his name. I answered. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said. In the office." I set my pen down. "About the photograph," I said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You were very certain." "I was," I said. He said, "Can you come to the office on Saturday? I'd like to show you something." The phrasing stopped me. Not I want to talk or I want to explain something. I'd like to show you something. My father, who managed information with the precision of someone who chose every word for its load-bearing capacity, had said show. What are you going to show me? I said. It's easier in person, he said. I have some things there. I told him I would be there at 10. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the call ended. The project documents were in front of me and I was not reading them. I was thinking about the specific texture of his voice on the phone, not the pleasant and final register, not the managed tone. Something else. Something that had been prepared, but not the way he usually prepared things. The way you prepare for a conversation you have been putting off for a long time and have finally decided you cannot put off any further. I opened the folder with the printed records and looked at the ownership transfer. Edward and Diane Calloway. February 1999. I had been 7 years old that February. I remembered the snow that year, the particular Ohio winter that came in heavy in January and didn't release until March, and I remembered the greenhouse going dark, the way a house goes dark when it is empty, which is different from the way it goes dark when people are simply inside it with the lights off. I had noticed the difference at 7 without having the vocabulary for it. An empty house has a stillness that a lived-in dark house does not. I had known they were gone before anyone told me. I closed the folder. On Saturday morning I drove to the office building and took the elevator to the 14th floor and walked down the corridor to my father's office. The door was open. He was seated behind the desk. The photograph was facing outward now, toward the visitor's chair, toward where I would sit, and there were 2 other items on the desk beside it. A manila envelope closed. And a smaller frame face down. He stood when I came in, which he did not usually do, and gestured to the chair. I sat down. I looked at the photograph, Maya Calloway's face, the confident smile, and then at the envelope and the small frame. Thank you for coming, he said, which was also unusual. He sat down across from me and put his hands flat on the desk and looked at me with the expression he had not had in my presence before, no management in it. Just the face of a man who has arrived at the thing he has been keeping and does not know, quite, how to begin opening it. You were right, he said. You knew her. My throat tightened. Tell me everything you remember about her, he said. And then I'll tell you what I haven't told you. I told him what I remembered. The greenhouse. The bowl of wrapped candies on the porch railing. The stand of trees behind the yard where we built things. Maya's particular confidence when someone looked at her, the way she stood slightly forward when a camera came out, not performing, just present. I told him about the winter they left, the house going dark, the for sale sign, the way I had asked my mother twice and been told it was Mr. Calloway's work. My father listened without interrupting. He was very still in his chair. When I finished he was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands on the desk. Then he reached for the manila envelope. He opened the clasp and slid out the contents, not one document but several, paper clipped together in 2 separate sets. He placed the first set in front of me. They were letters. Handwritten on plain paper in a script I recognized from the basement box I had found at 12, the same hand, the same quality of paper. The ones you found, he said. Your mother kept them. She gave them back to me when I moved to Columbus. She said I should have them near me. He paused. She knew more than she said when you asked her about them. I looked at the top letter. The salutation was simply, Gustavo. Maya Calloway's mother, I said. It was not a question. The handwriting, the name Calloway in the ownership record, the E. Calloway in the email address. Ellen. Yes, he said. I looked at him. How long? We grew up together, he said. In Athens. The same neighborhood, the same schools. Ellen Moreno before she married Ed Calloway. He said it evenly, not with the careful management of before, but with the flatness of someone reading coordinates off a map. We were close from 15 to 22. Then I met your mother and that chapter ended. Or I thought it did. And then they moved onto our street, I said. Ed Calloway took a job at the grain cooperative. It was coincidence. Or it felt like one. I was not the reason they came to Millfield. But when they arrived, he stopped. He picked up the second paper-clipped set and held it without placing it down yet. We became close again. Ellen and I. For about a year and a half. The room was very still. And Maya, I said. He placed the second set of documents on the desk. On top was a photograph, different from the backyard photo, smaller, more recent. A young woman in her late 20s at a graduation ceremony. Dark hair, the same particular angle of the chin when she was being looked at. Beneath the photograph was a single sheet of paper. A letter dated 14 months ago from an attorney's office in Columbus. I read the first 2 paragraphs. It was a letter establishing contact on behalf of Maya Calloway, now Maya Calloway Reese, requesting acknowledgement of a paternity matter that had been legally documented but never formally addressed between the relevant parties. I set the letter down. She's 31, my father said. She was born in March 1995. Ellen was already pregnant when they moved to Millfield. Ed Calloway knew. That was part of the arrangement. He knew, and he agreed to raise Maya as his, and when the arrangement became too difficult for him, they left. He said all of this in the same coordinate reading register. I did not know Ellen was pregnant when she arrived. She told me in the spring of 1996, after Maya was born. She told me that Ed knew and that they had decided and that she was not asking me for anything. She said she wanted me to know, and that was all. And you let her leave, I said. I let them all leave, he said. In February 1999. Because Ed had decided he couldn't continue and Ellen had decided she would follow him wherever he needed to go, and he looked at his hands. I had a wife and 2 daughters, and I had made choices, and I could not unmake them by holding on to a thing I had no right to hold. I looked at Maya Calloway Reese's face in the graduation photograph. The confidence of the smile. She had been 7 years old and unaware of any of it, building branch structures in the trees behind the greenhouse, and I had been 7 years old and unaware of any of it, 3 houses down. She's been in Columbus for 3 years, my father said. She found me through a genealogy registry. She wasn't looking for a relationship. She was looking for medical history. He paused. We've had 4 conversations. By phone. I've been trying to determine what the right thing to do is. Have you told Mom? I said. He looked at the surface of the desk. That was his answer. I squared the letters on the desk in front of me before I looked up at him. What do you want from me? I said. Why am I sitting here? Because you recognized her face, he said. In 25 years, in every office I've kept that photograph in, you are the only person who has ever recognized her face. And I thought, he stopped. He tried again. I thought if I was going to do this correctly, I should start by being honest with someone who already knew part of the truth. And you are the person in my life I trust most to tell me what correct actually looks like. I sat with that for a moment. The weight of it, and also the particular quality of being trusted with a thing after a long time of wondering whether you were trusted with anything at all. You need to tell Mom, I said. He nodded. And you need to write back to Maya's attorney, I said. Not eventually. This month. He nodded again. I'll help you, I said. With both of those things if you want help. But I'm not going to help you manage it. I'm going to help you do it. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, all right. My mother drove to Columbus the following Friday. She did not ask why my father had requested she come in person rather than talk on the phone, which told me she already knew the shape of what was coming, not the details but the shape. My mother had always known the shape of things slightly before she was supposed to. I was not in the room when my father told her. He had asked me if I wanted to be there, and I had said it was between them and that I would be in the kitchen if either of them needed me. I sat at my father's small kitchen table for an hour and 20 minutes and drank 2 cups of tea I didn't particularly want and listened to the low register of voices from the living room without being able to make out words. When my mother came into the kitchen, her face had the particular stillness of someone who has just processed something large and is choosing the order in which to feel it. She sat down across from me. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "You found it first." "The photograph," I said. "In the office." She nodded. "He's been carrying that photograph for 30 years, she said. "I always knew there was something in Columbus he wasn't telling me. I thought it was a decision he'd made about the transfer. I let myself think that." I said, "That's not on you." She looked at me. "I know when I'm letting myself think something," she said. "I'm 61 years old. I know the difference." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to fall apart. I want you to know that. I'm going to be very angry for a period of time and I'm going to need to think, and then I'm going to decide what I do with this." I told her I was not going anywhere and she could take as much time as she needed. That evening, after my mother had gone to the guest room and the apartment was quiet, my father and I sat at the kitchen table. He had the look of a man who has put something down after carrying it for a long time, not relief exactly, more the unfamiliar sensation of lighter hands. I said, when I was 12 I found the letters in the basement and asked Mom whose handwriting it was. He looked at his coffee cup. She said it was old correspondence from before I was born and put them back, I said. I went to look for them 2 weeks later and they were gone. You moved them. What I was actually doing that day was the same thing I do at work when something doesn't fit the official record. I went back to check. It is the same instinct, and it has been the same instinct my whole life. You moved the letters and I noted that you had moved them and I kept it. My father's hands were flat on the table. When I was 16, I said, I saw E. Calloway in an email you'd minimized on the family computer. I was 16 so I noted it and moved on. But I noted it. And in the week after the office visit, what I was actually doing was pulling ownership records and transfer histories the way I pull infrastructure documents for zoning reviews, systematically, until the shape of the thing became visible. 7 searches. A folder organized by date. The name of the people who sold the greenhouse in February 1999. He was quiet. When Paula asked at her rehearsal dinner if there was anyone from your side of the family who should have been invited, anyone estranged, anyone lost track of, you said no one. I looked at him. She existed. Meyer existed. She was 31 years old and she existed and you said no one. He said, I know. And when you called me last Thursday, I said, you said you wanted to show me something. Not explain. Show. Because you still needed to see whether I would recognize the truth before you had to say it directly. Even at the end you were still managing the door. I looked at him. What I was actually doing for 25 years was standing on the other side of it. Not demanding it open. Just staying close enough that when it did I was there. He looked at me. His eyes were wet for the second time in my adult memory of him. I know, he said. It came out rougher than the first time. I'm not telling you this to pile on, I said. I'm telling you because I want you to hear it said plainly by someone who was paying attention. Because the thing that made you trust me on Saturday, the fact that I recognized her face, that's the same thing that means I know exactly how long the door has been closed. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, you should have been told sooner. You and Paula both. Your mother should have been told sooner. I kept waiting for the right moment and the right moment was 31 years ago. I know, I said. I stood up and put my hand on his shoulder briefly, the first such gesture between us in as long as I could remember, and told him to get some sleep. I left the apartment and drove home in the dark and sat in my own kitchen for a while, not doing anything, just letting the evening settle into its final shape. My father wrote to Maya Calloway-Reese attorney 6 days later. The letter acknowledged the paternity documentation and expressed a willingness to pursue whatever level of contact Maya wished to have. He showed me the draft before he sent it. It was the most honest piece of writing I had ever seen from him, plain, without management, without the careful framing he typically applied to difficult communications. I told him it was right and he sent it. Maya responded through the attorney 3 weeks later. She was not looking for a father, the letter said. She had a father, Ed Calloway, who had raised her and remained in her life, whatever his complications. She was looking for medical history, which my father provided in a follow-up letter with the help of his doctor. And she said at the end of the attorney's summary that she was glad to know he was a real person and not just a name in a registry. That she had wondered. My mother is still in Millfield. She and my father are still married. What that means, practically, is being worked out in the slow and imprecise way that 34 years of a life together gets worked out when a large thing is placed inside it. They are talking more than they used to. My mother said this to me on the phone one Sunday, not as a positive development necessarily, just as a fact. I said that seemed like the right place to start. I think about the photograph a lot. The backyard, the 8 or 9 children, Maya's face angled toward the camera. My father had carried that photograph through every office he occupied for 30 years. Not to hold on to something he should have let go, I don't think that's what it was. I think he carried it because it was the thing he had decided to be honest about only with himself, in private, in the room where he worked, where no one would look at it and recognize a face. Except that I did. And I think about what that means, not as destiny or design because I don't believe in those framings, but as a plain fact about the nature of kept things. They do not stay kept. Not forever. Something always arrives, a face on a wall, a letter in a basement, a name in an address line, that asks you to look directly at what you have been managing. The question is whether you have cultivated, over the course of your life, the capacity to look. My father had. He had been carrying it for 30 years, and when the moment came he did not reach for another door. He put the documents on the desk and said, "Here is what I have not told you. That is not nothing. It is not everything. But it is the beginning of a thing being resolved rather than continued. I don't have a clean summary for what I took away from all of this. Only that the things we keep in the name of protection have a way of growing heavier than the truth would have been. And that the people we think we are protecting have almost always already sensed the shape of the thing, even if they cannot name it. We are less invisible to each other than we assume. If this story touched something in you, pass it along to someone who's been carrying a kept thing a little too long. That's the only reason it's worth telling. This is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. All names, characters, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional, and any resemblance to real persons or actual events is coincidental.